Yeah, I know we gonna go hard. We been that team ever since Bart started. All my cheese heads go pack go. Ain't showing no mercy, cutting no slack, no. I ain't a bad sport and I'll even wish you good luck. Only thing I will.
Good evening and welcome into Lombardi's Legends live on a Sunday evening. I am co-host Andrew Wagner, or Wags, and joining me as always is my co-host Dane Varese. Dane, how you doing tonight as we get ready to preview another position group for the 2022 NFL Draft?
Feeling good, Wags. Feeling good. I'm ready for the draft. We're about 18, 17 days or so from the NFL draft. So we're plowing through some of these important position groups. And today we're going to be talking about the edge position. Really important position for the Packers team. And one of those position groups, and I'm curious your take, but they've got a lot of guys on the roster, but really it's a top-heavy position group right now. Preston Smith, the Packers are able to bring back, and of course, Rashan Gary's emergence. But curious right off the bat, Wags, do you think this is a day one or a day two pick? Do you think that this is a priority? I'm curious where your head's at here.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting with 4 picks in the first 2 rounds and obviously then 5 in the first 3. We started with the defensive line group last week, and that's a position group where I wouldn't be surprised either way if they take someone with one of those first 5 picks. But we both felt it was important to preview that position group just because we've got a couple of guys coming to the end of their contracts, or in the case of Jaron Reed, just signed a 1-year deal. So it seems like the Packers might be restocking with talent there if they can get someone. And with the extra picks in this year's draft, certainly seems like a position that it could make sense for them to do that. With edge, while they don't necessarily need a starter, I think this is a group I would classify as surprised if they don't take someone with one of even their top 4 picks. Maybe they wait until 3rd round, but Dane, doesn't this feel like a position where you really would like to get someone at a premium position that's probably going to have an opportunity to come in right away and contribute, particularly in pass downs, or to at the very least spell both Preston Smith and Rashan Gary. Those 2 guys can't play every snap. So we've got a couple of other guys on the roster to fill out the position group. But with the departure of Ze'Darius Smith, I definitely think the time is now to bring in another guy that maybe projects to be a little bit more high impact, and perhaps even, if we're lucky, ready to go right away next year.
Yeah, and not only is Ze'Darius Smith no longer with the club, but I was actually pretty disappointed that Whitney Merciless retired. I was hopeful he could come back and kind of provide some of that early down work. Really liked what he was able to do for the Packers in the limited time that he was in Green Bay. So him not being there any longer as well, I think it's going to be a competitive group in camp, no matter what happens with the draft. Realistically, the Packers probably carry, I would say, Wags 5 edge position group guys on the active roster, probably going to stash another 2 or 3 on the practice squad as well. But, with a position group that already has a number of other guys, already on the team. I mean, I look at Jonathan Garvin, look at Tipin Nalei, of course, Ladarius Hamilton. There's Ray Wilbur more inside, but I think has the ability to maybe be a bit of an edge guy as well. So they have a lot of guys that have been on the roster, have done some of this stuff. But the question becomes, are they going to find that next guy that, dare I say, is like a premier talent to be the number 3 rusher and potentially long-term, Wags, project out and maybe take Preston Smith's position over the next few years. Preston Smith's turning 30 years old. This is a team that's always looking in the current, but also ahead. And no matter what, you can never have enough pass rushers. So I think this is actually a pretty critical position. I would be pretty shocked, jaw on the ground shocked, if they don't take a rusher in the first 2 days. It's just gut feeling is they're doubling down on defense right now, and this is just a quality group. And I think this is a pretty deep group in the draft too.
Yeah, and then the good thing is they're not necessarily picking out of desperate need, right? They've got their top guys, but to your point, it puts them in a position to bring someone along. It isn't necessarily expected to come in and play starters snaps right away. Hopefully, both Preston Smith and Rashan Gary can stay healthy, but they can essentially mentor that young man to come in. But nonetheless, would be nice to get someone that can come in and play right away and make an impact. Some of the other guys you mentioned have an opportunity certainly to make this roster and compete for snaps. And if they can make a leap, great. We'll talk more about them, I think, as the offseason continues, but this is all about the draft. So let's dive into it. And Dane, unlike the defensive line group from last week, something that's a little bit different is how deep this edge position is, particularly at the top of the draft. And so there's going to be a few guys that more than likely, now things can change, trades can happen, guys can, slip down in the draft or potentially all of a sudden someone's falling into the Packers' lap at 22. But I think it makes sense to acknowledge, and we're going off of the consensus draft rankings here, taking over 150 different draft big boards and taking the consensus picks. Aiden Hutchinson, Kayvon Thibodeau, Trayvon Walker, all projected to be top 10, if not top 7, 8 picks in this draft. Jermaine Johnson is another guy that's in that 10 to 15 range, depending on where you look. So although, maybe one of those guys, the Packers are really lucky if they like one of those guys and they fall to them all the way down to 22, they could be there. I think for the sake of being realistic about where the Packers are drafting, we're going to start a little bit lower into the mid to lower middle of the first round where the Packers are picking, because there's a lot of guys in this position group that are even going to be projected to go in the mid to late first round, second round, and early third round. So depending on who the Packers like and where they've got them slotted in, there's a number of guys we may not even get to tonight that could be potentially there for them that they like, and with the first or second of their second round picks as well. So Dane, we're going to start with George Carloftus. He's out of Purdue. And this is a guy that projects a little bit more as a 4-3 defensive end than he does as a 3-4 edge guy, but he's listed as an edge. Tall, 6'4", got a lean frame, and he's very powerful. So what I like about him is he's got the ability to really enforce against the one-on-one. Pretty strong against the run. He's got long arms, so he can set the edge pretty well. Showed some maneuverability and had I think a really productive season for Purdue. He's one of these guys, Dane, that isn't uber athletic. So is he someone that you'd feel has a ton of upside for a first round pick? I don't know. I think it depends on who you talk to. I would say if he was coming out of Ohio State instead of out of Purdue, then maybe he's got that pedigree a little bit. And that might not be fair because you could say that about a lot of these guys, but that's just a reality. When you've got the Bozas and that pedigree in recent history coming out of somewhere like Ohio State versus a Purdue, then maybe you just kind of get looked at a little bit differently. And so he's someone that I really like, but I don't know how much of a fit he is for the Packers. Definitely could put on a lot of weight based on his frame. Broad shoulders, tall, very lean right now, but has good power in his base. So he could be someone that could slide inside on pass downs and play more of a defensive end in the 3-4, while maybe giving you some of that plus ability on the outside, particularly on rundowns, with his size and his length. So I wouldn't say he's definitely not a 3-4 guy, but just based on kind of what he's been, maybe projected a little bit more for a 4-3. And so I'm not sure if the Packers see him as someone that will be a good fit for them. If you're talking about someone that you're taking in round 3 or 4, and he's a little bit of that tweener, and you think, well, maybe if it doesn't work out at edge, you can move him into D-line. But if you're a first round guy and you want to be on the outside, I don't know how excited he would be about that. So it makes me a little nervous potentially to use a first round pick on someone that might be kind of in between positions as he projects out to the NFL for a 3-4 defense. But that said, there's a lot to like here with George Carloftus. And so if he's there, I think with the second of the Packers first round pick, I wouldn't be shocked if they take a good hard look at him.
Yeah, Wags, Corey Stone, for those watching or listening live on our live stream, says Greek Freak 2.0. We take that production for the Packers, maybe get us over the top with a ring. I like that. So, you're talking about him, and I believe he's 21 years old. And, something that's going to be a theme, I think, with when we start talking about these draft selections. Here's the thing. Goody has drafted Jair Alexander, Rashan Gary, Darnell Savage, Jordan Love, and Eric Stokes in the first round. Everybody but Stokes was 21 years old when they drafted him. This team, under the current front office, Wags, I think has an eye on two things, or a lot of things, but one of them's age. They like to take guys when they're young and they're still ascending, and they like guys that are just freaks athletically. Does he fit this? I don't know, but I think that he could be a very real option based on his draft position and just the role he plays. Another guy I wanted to bring up, Wags, right away here, and has been dealing with a little bit of the injury issue is David. And forgive me, I might mispronounce his name. Ojabo, right, from Michigan. He's the young man who unfortunately had a pretty serious injury, an Achilles injury, during one of his workouts here in March, and that's causing him to drop down the draft boards a little bit here. Wags, it's incredible how far we've come with injuries, especially the Achilles injury. I remember that was a year-plus injury. Cam Akers last year proved you could get back on the field in about 6 months, which is absolutely remarkable. And they're talking about Ojabo potentially being back, mid-season. That being said, there's some concern there, right? There's some concern anytime you're drafting a guy with a premium pick that has an injury history. But at the same time, he was being projected potentially as a top 10 guy, right? Top 15 guy. Now, if the Packers are able to get him maybe 22, but heck, even at 28, he could be one of those guys that's really fascinating. As you mentioned at the top of our podcast, this is a position group. This edge position group is one where, they don't have an immediate need, but they do kind of have an immediate need. You need those pass rushers. But if you could have a young guy coming in partway through the season who, is freakish in nature, he's got this upside, I think, as a pass rusher. Wags, he's only played football for 5 years. That sounds like a Packer kind of guy. The Packers love to take these kind of guys that are just really good athletes that have maybe taken on the sport late, because I feel like they find kind of a, dare I say, a diamond in the rough kind of guy here. He's incredibly quick off the snap. And that's something that you can't really teach. Some guys just have that natural ability to anticipate and get off the line of scrimmage. And then he's just kind of filthy. You watch tape playing at Michigan, he doesn't get blocked for very long. And that's high praise anytime you're talking about a pass rusher. And Wags, I don't know how much it matters that Rashan Gary comes from Michigan, but I'll tell you what, it doesn't hurt with his development. So maybe somebody like Ojabo is somebody that just really catches the Packers' eyes, particularly with that second first round pick.
Yeah, it seems like the second of those first round picks might be a really sneaky spot depending on where they've got these guys slotted in. I think that'd make a lot of Packer fans happy if they go wide receiver at 22, edge at 28, and then just kind of just go from there. So but we'll see how things shake out because there's a lot of other positions that they can supplement or fill in, and so there's other talent in the draft. But yeah, Ojabo, you always like taking someone with that high upside, and as you said, they've had a lot of success going Michigan here in recent history with Rashan Gary. So I would not argue with that pick at all.
And I was curious about that. With the injury, how big of a red flag is that to you? Because, some teams, he might not even be on their board, right? They might pull him off. But for me, if it's not a season ender, and every team's going to probably deem that differently, I would actually be pretty eager to bring him in. I think that his upside is through the roof.
Yeah, I mean, he projected, as you said, as a potential top 10 pick before that injury. I think it has to be of some concern, no doubt. But if the Packers are picking at the end of the first round with the number of selections that they have, would it shock you, Dane, if they take two edge guys? No. Maybe if they like a couple of guys, Ojabo, if he's their guy with the second of their first round picks, and then they take another guy in the third round, potentially at edge, just double up at the position group. And now you kind of covered yourself a little bit. I'm not, that wouldn't shock me, to be honest with you. So I think they also, as we said, don't necessarily need someone to come in. They're not desperate for a starter at this position group. Obviously, you'd like someone that's going to be ready to play right away. That's always the ideal. But they have the ability to be somewhat patient, bring someone along. Is it great when someone's coming off a major injury like that? No. I will acknowledge that it's a little bit something that you're going to have to take a look at. Medical history is always going to be a concern, especially since those are the types of injuries that can quite honestly debilitate someone from a career standpoint. Not saying it's always a career ender, especially for someone of his age, but it's certainly something you have to take a close look at. So, Dane, I think I've got another guy that's slotted in here as a potential high second round or low first round pick, and he's out of Minnesota, and Boye Mafe, and he's someone that honestly, it's kind of interesting to see how he has shot up the draft rankings since the combine. Ran a 4.5 340 at the combine. So we talked about D-line and how important is it that they run a 40-yard dash at a high speed last week. At the edge, maybe a little bit more than a D-lineman, but I'm still not sure that it's super important because they're not covering wide receivers. But Dane, I will say that this is a guy probably projects pretty well into a 3-4 as an edge guy, above average athleticism, not just in a speed. He can get off of the ball. He's got that fast twitch, just very strong at getting around the edge, good body control. So I really like what he does. I mean, he pops off tape. A couple of downsides for him. You mentioned age with Ojabe. Mafe is 23 years old, so he's been in Minnesota for 5 years now. And he took a red shirt. Wasn't super productive until this last season, which, guys come on, but, with his age, you have to question how much upward potential he has, especially making that jump to the NFL level. They can't afford to wait until he's 26 years old to start producing. So that's something that's maybe a slight concern for me. I'm not sure. This is a guy, to be honest with you, he's not super physical. So that's a little bit of a red flag for me as well. Is does he have that motor? Does he really love football? It doesn't necessarily come across on tape. And I know that's not always fair, but we're in the business here of splitting hairs. And so it just kind of is what it is. Some of the things you notice. Frankly, he's someone that I would probably be fine with if they use a third round pick, or if he slides and they're able to get him in the fourth round, I'm not seeing it as a high second round pick, quite honestly. I could be off, but he's someone that certainly can get after the passer as a rusher. Not the best against the run. So I don't know. He's not the type of guy that I think the Packers need right now. He reminds me a little bit, and I know this is probably going to be kind of persona non grata, Kabir Baha Biamila, his off-field issues notwithstanding, but as a player, that's who Boye Mafe reminds me of. So you know what? As a pass rusher, if he could even get close to that level, I think we forget how good KGB was really bad against the run, but maybe more of a situational type guy. But that's why I'm not sure I would be super comfortable taking him with our first round pick, or even one of our second round picks. He's a little bit more of a flyer for me.
Oh, that's interesting. And I that's really good insight, because that's the thing is this is a premium position in the NFL these days. If you can hit the quarterback, you're going to get paid. That there's no doubt about that. Wags, let's stay in the Big Ten here. Another guy that I was taking a look at, Arnold Ebukadi. He's a guy who played for Penn State over there in 2021. Really like his production. He had 18 tackles for a loss and nearly 10 sacks, 62 total tackles. That's monster production for a guy kind of coming off the edge there. Really, really like his length as well. He's a guy who just, he's got that kind of body type and that build that I really like. He's not the tallest guy, right? He's about 6'1", 6'2", 6'3". He'd probably say 6'3". I think he's probably 6'2". But not the biggest guy, about 250. However, a guy who comes off the edge, and I think that he's very active in collapsing the pocket, but a couple of things that I think are red flags for me with him, and why I don't necessarily think he's going to be a Green Bay Packer. I couldn't find an age for him. So he's kind of swings between 21 and 23 is what I've been seeing online. I'm not saying that's his fault. I'm just saying, I haven't been able to find it on Penn State's website or other places. And athletically, my concern, and I watched actually quite a bit of him today. I was watching some YouTube and other places. I found some video. He just looked a little stiff, and from an athletic standpoint, like to have a guy who, maybe it just looks a little bit more fluid off the line of scrimmage. Something Rashan Gary, he's a big man, but when you watch him move, he's fluid, right? His hips, he's able to just kind of like swivel and swing around, and it's very effortless. When I was watching Ebukadi, it just looked like he was, he's talented, but he didn't look like he had kind of that natural flow that sometimes I like to be looking for from a Green Bay Packer pass rusher. Additionally, as you just mentioned prior, little bit of trouble in holding up against the run game, I think, consistently. Now, I think that that's something that could change, but this is kind of the balance when you start talking about pass rushers. Do they add weight and maybe lose a little bit of a step on the pass rush? Or, some guys are just naturally good at both. That's few and far between. I actually think Preston Smith is a shining example of a guy who can kind of just do a little bit of everything. But, when you look at somebody like an Ebukadi, he's new to football too, relatively new to football. So I actually use that as more of a plus. He's still learning his body in the game. I don't think he started playing football until he was a sophomore in high school. So it's been, a little bit of time, but not that much time. He's a good football player. He's going to bring it for some team. I just don't think he fits what the Green Bay Packers are necessarily looking for in their defensive scheme. So while he could be a guy that goes in the second round, maybe even late first round, I just don't see him necessarily being a Green Bay Packer pass rusher. I could be wrong. I've been wrong about the Packers draft every year of my life, I think. But he just doesn't seem to fit the mold based on what we've seen them do the last 4 years as Goody as GM.
Yeah, for sure. And it's what's interesting, Dane, about some of these guys, looking at consensus rankings, there is not much consensus for a lot of these guys in the edge position group. I mean, it's all over the board, isn't it? I think both of the guys that I reviewed were as high as like mid first round to as low as like third round pick. Some even a little bit lower, but most of them are kind of in the range that we're looking at. That's why we would like to look at the consensus rankings, by the way. It gives us a feel for what's likely to happen. Now, the thing is about a 3-4 defense is there may be 3-4 teams that really like a guy, but if they take someone else with their second round pick, all of a sudden that guy can drop all the way down to like early fourth round. So those are some of the things that I think we forget when you just look at, one draft ranking index. But Dane, that's a really good insight from you, so I appreciate that. All right, before we keep going, let's take a break and hear from our sponsor, DraftKings Sportsbook. DraftKings is the official sports betting partner of the NFL. And Dane, it's not NFL season now, but we have been doing college basketball. We've been doing NBA. NBA's off this week, so we've got a deal for the NHL. So I don't know. You put on your hockey hat and tell us if Andrea, your wife, is going to be making some daily fantasy picks in the NHL this week, or what have you got going on in the Parisi household?
Wags, I wouldn't say we're the biggest NHL hockey fans in the world, but I'm not gonna lie, we may have had the Capitals Penguins game on Saturday while our daughter was napping. Just doing a little research. You never know. And that's why DraftKings Sportsbook's so darn fun, right? Is you're able to get in there, place bets, and it makes games or even sports that you're not necessarily as engaged in that much more enjoyable to watch. Take a flyer, right? Take a flyer on a team, have some fun, and sit down on a Saturday and watch it. So again, DraftKings Sportsbook, please folks, use promo code TPPN. Again, promo code TPPN. Watch some hockey. Have some fun with it. It's a great sport. It's violent. It's fun. It's fast-paced. Again, thanks DraftKings Sportsbook for making the Parisi household just a little bit more engaged in NHL hockey this week.
For sure. So download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code TPPN. Bet just $1 on any NHL team and you get $150 in free bets if they win. That's promo code TPPN at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. 21 plus restrictions apply. See show notes for details. So, Dane, I think where we were leaving off then, that leads me to another one of my guys that I was reviewing. We each took 4 for this time around, and this is Drake Jackson is next down the list for me out of USC. I got to be honest with you. First guy that I've reviewed that I really like. I'm not saying that he should be a higher pick than the other guys we've reviewed, but prototypical 3-4 guy. He was really kind of projected as a mid to lower mid first round pick almost all season, coming off his junior season. He came out early. He's 21 years old. Started his career at Notre Dame, transferred to USC. It just slipped a little bit after the combine. So honestly, that doesn't bother me that much because I think when you look at the tape, this is a guy that plays instinctually. He sets the edge against the run and can get after it in the pass. Been very consistent in terms of productivity throughout his career. Certainly as a guy at the college level, you expect his, pressure rate to increase every season. It did, but started off his career 5.5 sacks in his first season. And it's just been super consistent since then. So that to me is something that I like to see. Was he able to be productive early on at a top level program at the college level? And he was. And so I don't care what some of the intangibles may say, how many reps he did at 225, whatever. This dude can play football. He plays with a low pad level, is just really good body control. There's some cons here. I could wax poetic on him, but honestly, if they're able to get him with one of their second round picks, I would be over the moon. I think this is a guy that could come in and help us right away. I think he's still got a lot of upside, and although he might be a little bit light right now, certainly he's got time to put on some good weight here. Especially in the NFL offseason program. So, I think for a second round pick, if the Packers are able to use one on Drake Jackson, I'd be pretty happy with that. I think he would be a great fit for them, and still has some of that upside you'd like to see as well.
I love it. And that age, right? I'm always kind of circling a couple of these things. It's not a guarantee, especially when you start getting past the first round, but I like that quite a bit. And, talking about athleticism, it's funny you mentioned, you found the first guy that you really like. I'm going to just follow you up with somebody I really like too. Nick Bonito from Oklahoma. Really, really like him. He was a 4-star guy out of high school. Exceedingly athletic. So not the biggest guy out there, but he's right around the 250-pound range, 6'3", kind of a long, rangy guy. He's running a 4.5 40 Wags at 250 pounds. Seems like something that the Packers really like. And what's so good about him, he's just massively athletic. He's somebody that, can just blow by college level offensive tackles. The question becomes, at the NFL level, is he going to be able to shed blocks? And that, as with anybody, when you start getting past the first 5 or 6 picks, generally in the NFL draft, you're going to start to be like, okay, can he do this? Can he do this at the next level? But I really like what Bonito's able to do as far as how quick he is, again, off the ball. He's, I was talking about a couple of picks ago about stiffness. This guy has kind of that natural ability. He looks kind of like Gumby out there. He's really flexible, moves his hips incredibly well. I love his hand placement as well. I was watching YouTube today, and he's one of those guys that just seems to be able to get the edge and just like pop, just really use his speed to get around offensive linemen. I think at the next level, as with a lot of these young guys, he's going to need to continue to develop, different skill sets as far as from the pass rushing page. Some guys are one-hit wonders in college, and they need to continue to develop and do different things. And I'm not saying that Bonito is that, but I think he's somebody that he's got probably 2 really strong tools in his tool belt, but I think he has the ability to add some of those other tools, especially with Preston Smith and Rashan Gary, kind of playing more of that mentor role. The harder part of all this then, though, is setting the edge is something that seems to be a pretty big problem for him at this stage in his career. Saw him time and again seem to kind of get swallowed up when he was expected to set the edge and force running backs to bounce inside. That's something that's a big part of the game that he's going to need to develop. But I really like how fast he is. You can't teach the athleticism that he's able to provide to this team. And I think he's another one of those guys where if you're looking the back end of the second round, we're not talking first round here, but back end of the second round, or, with all of the draft picks, if the Packers choose to trade back up, we know Goody is a very active guy. Would not shock me if Bonito, the Packers trade back up into, early third round or late second round and grab somebody like him because of how fast he is. The arrow's pointing way up on this young man. And that's exactly the kind of thing you want to see the Packers do, is pounce on athleticism. They know how to coach him in Green Bay. He seems to fit the Packer mold.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there's lots of ways the Packers can attack this draft with the number of picks that they have. Do they, maybe shop a couple of those mid to later picks to get an extra third round pick, as you said, or move up and get another second round pick? And they'd probably have to let go of their third to get it into the second. But could you imagine if we ended up with 2 firsts and 3 seconds? History tells us that they probably may even move back from one of their first round picks or their second round picks.
Feels
and end
likely,
up with,
doesn't it?
with a bunch of third rounders, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's, there's lots of different ways that they can attack this draft. Either way, I think we're going to get stocked with a bunch of opportunities to get some good players in. So, Dane, last guy for me that we're reviewing here is Cameron Thomas out of San Diego State. So this is a classic. We're not looking at highlights. We're not looking at the combine tape. We're not looking at his 40-yard dash. I'm just looking at this guy as a football player, and I'm telling you, this guy loves football. He's got a motor. He's strong. He plays with physicality, seems to really love contact. He's got power. He's got size. So that's right off the top. That just pops out, and has not had any serious injury issues throughout his college career. So a lot of things to like right off the bat. You're getting someone that's just a football player, highly productive at San Diego State. Last season, 11 and a half sacks, 21 tackles for a loss. So just all over the football field. Was really making an impact and can wreak havoc, in the backfield, both against the run and against the pass. So battles every play. So, this is something that the Packers could gain an edge on if you sacrifice maybe a little bit of upside potential, because Thomas is someone that athletically isn't rated super high. That's why he's sitting down here in more of that late second, early third round consensus position. He's ranked, though, as high as a mid first round pick on some boards and lower on some others. So again, we've got a lot of volatility at this position. I think the guys that watch him and say, this guy can just ball, probably have him ranked a lot higher. The folks that really just look at the measurables and maybe aren't paying as much attention to the tape, maybe have him a little bit lower. But I will say that if you're able to get him out there, he can play the run and set the edge well. He's got long arms. He's, as I said, disruptive in the run game. He can be out there early downs. And if you have him in there rotating and you've got Rashan Gary and Preston Smith, and especially if he's rotating and getting Rashan some snaps, those poor offensive linemen are not getting any plays off with Rashan Gary. And then you've got someone, Cameron Thomas, comes in with that tenacity and that grind, and he's just really getting after it every single snap. That's something that can be a real advantage for a team like the Packers. So I think this is a classic Packers guy. They really like those guys that's just, let's not forget, we're evaluating football players, not track stars, football players. And this guy can play football. So anyway, I would say that for one of their second rounders, or if he even falls in the third round, or the Packers move around to get themselves in position to snap up Cameron Thomas around that range in a draft, I wouldn't be shocked. He might be slightly more projected as a 4-3 guy, but I think he can play the 3-4. Maybe moves in on pass downs as well, kind of like the George Carloftus, as we mentioned earlier. Right. But if you're getting someone a little bit later than a first round pick, as I said earlier, I'm more comfortable with taking a guy that maybe a slight tweener, but the way that he plays football, I'm putting that to the back of my mind. They can find a spot for him on the field, and I think he can help this team.
That's great. No, that's great insight. You're getting me excited about him all of a sudden, Wags. One other guy I maybe wanted to bring up kind of in the tail end of, maybe kind of what we're doing here. And then I'd love to hear if there's anybody else that just pops off any round from your perspective. But Kingsley Enagbare, he's somebody that I took a look at as well. And, I like the size, right? I do with him. He's just, I've been saying it, but he's long. I think that's really important when you're talking about an edge rusher at times. But the question becomes, the pad level sometimes gets a little bit up there. And anybody who's ever played a second of football knows, as soon as those pad level goes up, you're kind of like dead in the water. You're going to get pushed around quite a bit. That being said, incredibly aggressive guy. He's kind of got a nasty streak and I like that about him quite a bit. He's somebody that seems incredibly strong, just kind of filthy, nasty, wants to punch you in the mouth type of football player. Really like that about him. There's some things that he's going to need to do separation has been a bit of a challenge for him. He gets eat up in blocks a little bit. You see that with some of these younger pass rushers, especially at the college level. The question becomes, how do they adjust using their hands? Do they rely more on their athletic ability? Or do they start to lean in on their coaching a little bit more? Because athletic ability only gets you so far, but if you can start to work on technique, that can get you somewhere there. But at the same time, he's a guy who's had some trouble wrapping up as a tackler. He loves to go in for the big hit, but sometimes, that can leave things to be desired from a tackling standpoint. So there's some pluses. There's some minuses, but I think he's a nice football player. I'll be curious to see where he ends up going. As you said, there's a lot of up and down on where folks are being projected at this point. But that being said, I do like Kingsley Enagbare. He went to South Carolina, 22-year-old guy out there, loves to hit. A lot of the things you're talking about, a football player, this young man's a football player. The question just becomes, where does he go? Is he somebody that fits the Packers mold? Remains to be seen.
Yeah. So I think there's lots of options here as we see Dane. And I'm curious to see here too, if you have any sleepers before we wrap up. One guy that as we were going through research and watching tape today, just looking through D'Angelo Malone out of Western Kentucky, smaller school guy, but super accomplished as a pass rusher, might be one of the best pure pass rushers in this draft. Reminds me a lot of Randy Ramsey, actually. Packers had a lot of hopes for him coming out as an undrafted guy. I think he certainly projects a little bit higher. He's going to get drafted in the mid rounds more than likely, but just a little bit undersized. He's only 240 pounds, but he's long, he's athletic, and he's had double-digit sacks in multiple years in his college career. This guy gets after the quarterback, so he might be also someone, as I said earlier, if the Packers take an edge guy early, that if someone like D'Angelo Malone is available to them and they really like him in 4th, 5th round area, maybe he's a little lower than that, I'm not sure, but I could see them snapping D'Angelo Malone up as a second edge guy that's just a pure pass rusher. Bring him in those pass rush situations to spell those top 2 or 3 guys, and I think can make a little bit of a difference on the field. Perhaps as a special teamer as well. That would probably be his way onto the 53-man roster. But I really like him because it's not someone that you're expecting to be an every down type player, but could certainly make an impact just as a pass rusher in his rookie season. And then you can work with him, see if he can add a little bit of weight, fill out, and continue to develop other parts of his game as well.
Love it. No, I think that's really important. You highlight the special teams portion of that as well. I think there's going to be a refocused focus, if that makes sense, on special teams going into this season. I'm just going to mention Jeffrey Gunter, small school guy, Coastal Carolina. He blocked a couple kicks in his career there. You always like to see that. Somebody who's kind of got a nose for the football on special teams, but also somebody who off the edge can just fly. The challenge this young man has, coming from a small school, is a technique issue. He just doesn't seem to have the technique right now, but he seems to have a lot of the tools that, as far as I'm concerned, at rushing the passer. He's got a lot of awareness, I would say, on special teams, a little less so in day-to-day, setting the edge and becoming that edge guy at the next level could be a challenge, especially with the learning curve coming from a smaller school. That being said, when you see guys that have some of those tools there, and I'm talking about probably a day 3 pick right now, and maybe we're talking 5th round or later, if the Packers are looking for their next Jonathan Garvin, it might be somebody like Jeffrey Gunter that makes an awful lot of sense. Has had some productions. He's got a nose for the football. He's forced 6 fumbles, Wags, just in 2020 alone. That is not easy to do at any level. So he's a guy who, can put his hat on the ball. He can chase down runners, and I think that he's a very good pass rusher. The question is, can he come into Green Bay? Are the Packers willing to bring him in or somebody like him, right? And just kind of show them the ropes at the NFL level, do a little bit more technique approach, a little bit more coaching. I think he's got the upside to be a guy that sticks on an NFL roster, and he seems to have some of those measurables as well that the Packers like. So just somebody to keep an eye on. Jeffrey Gunter wouldn't completely surprise me as a late round guy in Green Bay.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement then that the Packers may take a couple of guys at this position group and probably bring in 1 or 2 undrafted free agents as edge guys as well. So we're definitely going to be restocking the competition for a fight for the roster at the bottom portion of this position group, while I think bringing in potentially, hopefully, one of the early round guys that could have that high impact potential. So Dane, any other thoughts then on the edge group? I think one thing that stood out to me as we talked through is, short of one of the premium top 4 guys slipping down or the Packers trading up or something like along those lines, it sounds kind of like maybe there's a couple of guys that if they're there with the second of their first round picks, they go for it. Otherwise, we're kind of, I think, really looking at some of the guys that might be in that second to third round range that have a little bit more value. And even though there's some question marks with some players, once you get to that point in the draft, there's not quite is much of a premium in terms of where you're picking them from. So it sounds to me like, based on our projection, that it might be more likely that the first of their edge guys comes in the second round versus in the first round. Would you agree with that?
I completely agree with you, barring some, crazy scenario where a top 2 guy somehow keeps sliding. We'll see a little bit, I think, about how the draft plays out. You never know. There's sometimes run on different position groups. If there's a run on pass rushers, I wouldn't be surprised if the Packers trade up with one of their second round picks. It just wouldn't surprise me, knowing how they work. They will attack. But Wags, I would be surprised if they don't add a pass rusher early. It's a position that's important. It's one of those positions too, unlike, I would say, even defensive line, you can find pretty solid, I think, defensive linemen and free agency. That's just a position group where guys there seems to be, Wags, and I maybe you disagree with me, but when we're talking interior defensive linemen in a 3-4 defense, there seems to be kind of like a lunch pail crowd of defensive linemen that make the rounds in the NFL that are good and that can make an impact pretty quick. Packers were able to sign Reed, so he's a good example. Somebody who's able to come in. There is not that with the edge position. If you got a good edge, you're probably going to keep them around until, the contract stuff goes absolutely bonkers with them. So this is a position group where the Packers really are going to want to, I think, reinvest in. Preston's not getting any younger. They just invested in Preston. But no matter what, you always need a third or maybe even a fourth pass rusher. This is the chance to do it. Deep draft. A little bit of question marks of where they all rank. I'm sure the Packers are very clear on who they think is the talent there, and they might not agree with some of these other NFL teams, but it also might play to the Packers' favor. But I think they go very early, second round with a rusher.
I think that's a great point. Just with the depth of this position group as it's projected in this draft, more than likely the Packers are going to have a number of guys available to them at every pick that they make in the first couple of days that could potentially be a value in their eyes. So it just really depends on who else is available on their board at those other position groups as they make those selections. But more likely than not, I think they're probably going to end up getting one of these edge guys in the first 5 picks. So we came in with that theory. I think we're leaving with that theory. So folks, thanks so much for joining. Quieter night here in the chat, but as you listen, if any of you have any comments or thoughts on our projections, or if you think we missed out on some guys that we should have talked about, let us know on our socials. We appreciate you following along as always. We'll be back next week. We may have a surprise episode coming up here midweek in the next week or two as well. So folks, as always, be legendary and go Pack go.
Every year I know we gonna go hard. We been that team ever since Bart started. All my cheese heads go Pack go. Ain't showing no mercy, cutting no slack, no. I ain't a bad sport and I'll even wish you good luck. Only thing I will